So the case into Johnathan Boley, we know that he went missing almost a week ago tomorrow, and then was found around 48 hours later. He was dead. His dog was with him alive. So kind of start with just, I think the search efforts are a big point of this. There were explosives, we'll get into all of that. But the search efforts, when you heard all of the stops that were pulled out, was that common search efforts in that situation?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's pretty standard fare, particularly when you've got a little boy like this that's missing that is literally at the mercy of nature. Okay. That's the first thing you have to think of. Um, and many times, of course, there's a sinister thing that comes up in your mind. There's some perpetrator out there. That may have snatched him, those sorts of things. So all of that stuff comes into bear here. But yeah, I mean, what they did was right on the money, to try to track him down and find him because time is of the essence. When a little boy, heads out into the woods, he's just thinking about heading out into the woods. He's not thinking about, well, what if it rains? What if it turns cold? What if I don't have anything to drink? That's not where their little mind is. All right. So, and the adults in the group know this, so that's why the effort that was put forward here, was they did the best they could at that moment in time.
And the distance that he traveled, we know he was found around 2 miles from the place he was last seen at his father's home.
Mhm.
That seems far for a 4 year old, but in your opinion, what do you think when you hear 2 miles from the father's property?
You have to factor in, that he's got his pup with him, and the pup is leading the way. And if, particularly with a dog, they get something in their mind vis-a-vis their nose, they're on the track, and this is his buddy, and he's traveling with him. There's a familiarity with him. And, the dog is not necessarily going to lead him back home. It's kind of poignant, when, we find out in later reports that this animal is literally adjacent to him, or at least that's what the authorities are saying at this point in time. So it is a great distance, but how many times have we ever been distracted when we're traveling and we don't realize how much distance we've covered. And particularly if a little boy, if his eyes are on his dog, he's not necessarily walking out there alone. Okay. If he's got his eyes on his dog, um, time passes quick, distance passes quick, So yeah, it's reasonable that he could have covered that amount of territory.
And I know we have no timeline on anything just yet, how long he had been dead by the time they found
Yeah.
him. But in your opinion, how quickly do you think that how do you think he got 2 miles? And then, um, I mean, we don't know exactly how he died just yet, but is there any
Yeah.
timeline you can make of this?
Well, I don't know. I'm kind of bracketing this. I think one of the numbers that I've heard kind of pitched out there is like a 36-hour time frame. Maybe you could extend it out even further. I understand that there's a young sibling as well that bore witness to him, apparently going underneath this fence. And it's really hard to kind of pin that down, relative to, and particularly considering everything that's swirling around the rest of the family right now. Okay. So we don't really know what the orientation to time is, and that's going to be very important, at least in my mind, because it's critical here that when they're talking about that they don't have a cause of death, that means that the answer is going to rest somewhere. And when we say no cause of death, what we're essentially, I'm not saying they don't have a cause of death. What I'm saying is they've ruled out trauma. All right. There's no evidence of that according to what they have let out so far. So we can exclude trauma at this point, but the list is still quite extensive. And one of the things, for me, as a former death investigator and a forensic science professor, I want to know what other kind of physiological mechanisms were at play here. Are we talking about exposure? Are we talking about dehydration? Because that can set in, relatively quickly, particularly if you think about, well, how much care had been taken with him prior to him leaving. Okay. Had he had proper nourishment? Had he taken on any kind of fluids at all prior to leaving? It's not just after he leaves It's all the time that has to be accounted for prior to that. So you get out there and you're wandering around, he becomes stressed out, and that can have a huge effect on his body and the way he responds.
And the dog being with him, I'm not sure if you've worked similar cases. I'm sure you have, where there's been animals involved.
Mhm.
But talk a little bit about that. And was that shocking to you that the dog stayed with him?
No, not necessarily. It really doesn't. The dog is obviously attached to the child. And yes, I have both in Atlanta and New Orleans where I worked. I've seen animals sit right by their masters, when we would, and they would have to be removed by the local SPCA or whoever it was at that particular time to take them away from their masters. Incredibly loyal, and no, that does not surprise me at all. Um, what does surprise me is the fact that this child was to this degree unsupervised. That's the big shocking part here for me, I think. And look, not laying blame. I mean, the youngins, run off. That's what they do. And there's parents in the audience. They know that they do. My kids have gotten out of my sight over the years. But still, to this point, you think about this this space that the child indwelled, this two mile area, and we don't really know how circuitous the route might have been either. Was it a straight line distance, or did he have to cut through briars and brambles and everything else to get to where he was located? A thing that's kind of troubling here, kind of listening to the presser, is this child is either found adjacent to a body of water or in a body of water. That's kind of unclear. You recall we had a significant amount of rain during that period of time. And that's something that can't be, at this point in time, excluded off of our list potentially for causes of death, or at least a contributing factor. All right. I'd like, sorry, I'd like to know about this. I'd like to know, I think, probably what's going on with the lungs, what they saw at autopsy. That's going to be a big factor. There's a diatome test that we do as well, where we look for these little creatures, if you will, microscopically, that can be found in the lungs if water has been taken on, and these little creatures indwell. I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. Indwell particular areas of water or bodies of water, and that's indicative that the water was taken on. And there's other things that we look for in addition to that. You couple that with high stress situation, absence of water, drinkable water, and any kind of nutrition. And you got this little baby out there that's, just, I'm sure, racked with fear.
And another question that I've seen a lot is the thermal imaging that was used. The sheriff said that thermal imaging was up since early or late that night that he went missing. Um, we don't know when exactly Johnathan passed away, so we don't know if he would have been picked up on thermal imaging, but we know the dog was still alive and the dog would have been picked up. Do you have any idea on how they could have been missed, especially on thermal imaging?
I really don't. I don't know. And again, this is merely speculative on my part. I think that one of the questions I would ask is kind of the density of the forested area around there. I want to know if that plays any role in this, and also any kind of meteorological circumstances. But the fine point that we can put on imagery like this now, I would strongly doubt that would be the case. So I don't know. I think one of the big questions people are going to ask is this the original spot that he was in? I think that's going to be a big question, probably, and I don't know if it'll ever be completely answered to anybody's satisfaction. I know that question will be asked. Was he placed here? Had he been somewhere else? And that's certainly an intriguing question. But again, we have to think, why would that have occurred, particularly if we're absent trauma at this point in time, which is, of course, what the pathologist is saying.
And then getting into the dad charges, we know that explosives were found on his property. They had believed at one point that there were explosives outside of his property that halted the search. How do you think that impacted the investigation and the efforts to find Jonathan?
Well, it certainly causes. I can tell you this, having been on scenes over the years where there were, well, first off, there were volatile chemicals. I've been in scenes where there are explosives, and also in scenes where you've got drug manufacturing going on as well, and it gives you pause. Everybody wants to go home at the end of their shift, right? So that can cause a hiccup in the timeline, certainly, because right now, the police have a very difficult job here. They're trying to juggle their personal safety. And this is not something that happens with great frequency, okay? They're having to balance this thing out. We've got a little boy out here that's missing. We've got to find him. That's critical. That's time critical. And also, our people are out here. Is there any evidence in there that's beyond, on the inside of the tape that everybody's saying stay away from because we got to get this area secured? So that's quite the conundrum, wouldn't you say? To be in that position. So yeah, it can make it difficult. I got to tell you one more thing. I'm going to be very interested in when it comes to this baby. Um, as you know, we don't have talks yet. Okay, that's what has been stated, and that's standard. All right, we know that there's not going to be talks probably for a couple of weeks, I would imagine. I want to know what he's got on board. I want to know if there is anything in his system, period, in the paragraph. I want to know what it is. Is there anything in his system that should not be in a child system 4 years old? Okay. And is there anything in that environment that had contaminated to the point where he was able to ingest it or take it on? I have no idea. I know that it's a very precarious world that we live in now, and many people are exposed to some horrible things. I'd like to know that at a baseline, just try to understand that. And very well might not be, okay? But you have, as an investigator, and I can almost guarantee you, for those investigators, they have to rule that out. And they're thinking about that, I can promise you.